Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. In more than 28 years of corrections, I have used or supervised Pepperball hundreds of times. Now, as a master instructor for Pepperball, I teach others about the versatility and effectiveness of this Pepperball system. From cell extractions to disturbances on the rec yard, Pepperball is the first option in my correctional toolbox. One of the most dangerous times for officers is during cell extractions. Pepperball allows officers to respond with the lowest level of force and still be effective and ready if the situation escalates. The responding officer controls where the projectiles are aimed, how many projectiles are launched, and how rapidly they're deployed. This allows the response to be tailored to the moment. To learn more about Pepperball, go to www.pepperball.com or click the link below in the show's information guide. Pepperball is the safer option first. Well, hello and welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My name is Michael Cantrell, and today I've got an old friend. We've known each other for several years, Chris McConnell. We're going to talk about his career and his life and what he's doing now that he's retired. He started off in the military, was airborne infantry, and worked in law enforcement for a little while before he came to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. He's had several, and we'll go through his career and learn about each step. But he's had several jobs through the years. He was an emergency preparedness specialist, which was where we met each other on the teams and with EPO stuff. Finally retired in 2022 as a complex warden at USP Pollock. So he has went through the ranks from correctional officer all the way to the top. And I'm excited to have him on here and hear about his story. So welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you listen to the podcast. I always like to start these out the same. Tell me where you grew up and what it was that got you into corrections.
Well, I grew up in a small rural town in northeastern Pennsylvania called Canton. It was a law enforcement family. My mother was a secretary and office manager, but my dad and my brother were both Pennsylvania state troopers.
Oh, wow.
They're both retired for a period of time. My oldest brother was a municipal police officer, and he worked for the sheriff's office. So needless to say, a law enforcement family.
Yeah.
So I knew at a very young age that I wanted to be in that brotherhood, that fraternity, that civil service, that law enforcement type job. That internal desire never left me. It's probably still with me today. I graduated in 1987. Of course, I was 18 years old, probably a little wild, probably not fully mature. So I enlisted in the United States Army. I went in as an airborne infantryman.
Nice. Thank you for your service.
Yes, thank you. Probably one of the best decisions of my life. I served 4 years in one combat tour in Operation Desert Shield Storm.
Excellent. And so then you came back and you went into law enforcement? Is that right?
I did. After I served in the military, I decided to pursue civilian law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
So after I was honorably discharged, I did something that's rather unique. In the state of Pennsylvania, I used my GI Bill to pay my way to become a certified municipal police officer. So I attended a state university that hosted a police academy, and I paid my way through to become a police officer. Of course, in the hopes of already being certified and being hired by a department that doesn't have to pay for my academy. So it was kind of a new concept, I believe, at the time. But once I got out, I started looking around at the municipal pay. It wasn't the highest back in the 90s. It was actually pretty low.
Sure.
But knowing I needed experience to move on, whether I went state or federal or whatever my desire was going to be, my father had a contact in the Tioga County Sheriff's Department. So he knew the sheriff there. It's kind of a funny story. When I was interviewed by the sheriff, I don't think he asked me one question about my qualifications. I think we talked about my dad the entire interview. But anyway, I was hired on there for about a year, and that was my, initiation, so to speak, into corrections, transport, court security, prison, inmates, everything.
So you had some time there as working in the jail as a deputy?
I did. I worked in the jail. Yes, that's correct.
And so what was it that made you want to keep going in that instead of heading out to the street? Because a lot of guys start in the jail, they get a couple of years under their belt, and then they try to hit the road. What was it that kept you in corrections?
Well, I can say this, as I previously mentioned, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe my hourly pay was $8.08.
Yes.
That was fairly low at the time. So I knew it was probably a position that I was going to do for a period of time, get my experience and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is around 1993. I'm 24 years old, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons, commonly referred to as the BOP,
mm-hmm.
was having a job fair in our area.
Right.
I did not have the BOP on my radar. I did not know much about the BOP, but I was certainly interested.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a newly built correctional complex in Allenwood, Pennsylvania. So I thought, okay, job fair, Allenwood, Bureau of Prisons, paramilitary, law enforcement agency, canines, investigations, SWAT teams, gangs, good benefits, pay, career advancement, travel. I'm thinking all this stuff. My mind is spinning.
Sure.
Of course, I went to the job fair. I applied, and I was hired as a GS6 correctional officer. And that was the start of my 30-year career with the BOP.
Excellent. And so did you get hired on as a GS6 because you already had that year in at the jail?
The year in at the jail, and I believe my military, as I remember correctly.
Okay, yeah, because that was the thing. If you didn't have some prior experience, you had to come in as that GS5 and wait a year. So now, I guess some of them are coming in as GS8.
I've heard that as well.
Yeah, so, which, I mean, if they're coming in the door and they've got the experience, I can even understand that. So I worked 8 years in corrections before I went to the BOP, and I kind of had to, walk in there and shut my mouth and let them reteach me. But yeah, we don't always get brand new people off the street like you. They came in, they've already been doing the job.
That's right.
So where'd you start off at, Allenwood?
So I did. I started off at Allenwood. I was making a little more money. I think my salary was $24,800. Back in the early 90s, it was a little more. It went a little bit further than it does today, but I did. I started at Allenwood, Pennsylvania. The nice thing is it was activating. So we actually had time to put the facility together. We put the beds together, the cells together, the lockers together, brought in all the equipment. So I didn't have that first time walking in a prison with a gate slamming behind you effect. I somewhat slowly eased into the Federal Bureau of Prisons because we were activating it.
Did you guys get extra training and stuff because you had some time there without inmates? Was that a plus?
It was a plus. Extra training. I remember we had a lieutenant, old school lieutenant from Lewisburg, and he was our training lieutenant. And what a great opportunity to have the time to sit in classes and be trained by someone that has 30 years experience managing inmates. So yes, a definite plus.
Probably one of the highlights of my career was when I activated Thompson. And I got all those brand new people off the street and got to spend time with them, teaching them everything that I'd learned piece by piece. And it was very rewarding. I still keep in touch with a lot of them.
Sure.
So you get the complex up and going. Complex is a different kind of bird. I mean, it's a different kind of world. Multiple prisons. How many there? 3?
Yep, there was actually 4 there,
okay.
If you count the minimum, because the minimum security or the federal prison camp already existed. So the complex consisted of the low, the medium, and high security.
Right.
Which we call penitentiary. The minimum security institution, again, was already existed. So 4 levels, and I believe the complex philosophy was allowing staff to be promoted without transferring.
Mm-hmm.
So I took advantage of that. Again, I entry level as a GS6 correctional officer, and I promoted to a GS11 lieutenant right at the complex.
So you may not have had that day when the door slammed, but you did have a day when all the inmates showed up. Tell me what that week was like, because it's more like a week. It's not really one day, but it happens over a period of time. Tell me what that was like.
Yeah, well, the good thing is they came in slowly. A bus load here. A bus usually has, was it 40 inmates, I believe, that we put on bus?
Yeah.
40 inmates at a time. So we were able to, put so many in a unit at a time. You may have 10 inmates in a unit, and the correctional officer can run the unit with 10 inmates. And the next day we may have 20, and then 30, and then 40. So we kind of, build our way into having a full housing unit of 100 plus inmates. So it was actually kind of nice. I like to think that was one of the reasons why Allenwood ran so well. I believe some institutions start out not running so well for one reason or another. But I believe that's one reason Allenwood was just one of those institutions that ran very well.
Right. So what was your next?
Well, I like to say when I started the Bureau, I was still kind of looking for that brotherhood, that camaraderie. Mm-hmm. So I did join the Special Operations Response Team. Nice. We call it SORT. It's kind of the Bureau's or the BOP's version of a tactical SWAT team. They trained in dealing with high-risk situations, collateral duty, generally train 1 to 2 days a month, 1 to 2 weeks a year, similar to the National Guard. And even back in the 90s, we competed nationwide with other SORT teams, like running and obstacle courses and tactical entries and repelling and shooting and things of that nature. So that was a neat opportunity for me as well. That was kind of my introduction into emergency preparedness or emergency management.
So one of the recent podcasts I did was on becoming a member of a team. It's one of the pieces of advice I give staff. As soon as you can, get on one of those teams, whatever it is. How important was it to you to be the member of SORT that early in your career?
Extremely important. That's one of the keys to success that, maybe perhaps we'll talk about later. Corrections is a tough business. It's a tough business. You have to do something else. I highly encourage any staff member to get involved in their institution, whether it's part of a team, whether it's an instructor. It's your career. Make the most out of it. So extremely important to have another outlet like the Special Operations Response Team and actually getting a day or two out of the prison, hanging out with the fellows, shooting weapons, taking your mind off corrections. Extremely important. I didn't realize it back then. I more realize it today.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right about becoming an instructor. If you want to become the master of a subject, the best way to do it is to teach it. And that's going to carry you throughout your career. So, yeah, that's a good point there. Your next step? Looks like you became a lieutenant. When did you make up your mind you were going to go into leadership?
Well, it's funny. At the time, I was a GS officer, so I was considered a senior officer specialist. There was a position open, a correctional counselor. It was a GS9 step. I thought, well, I only have, short time in the Bureau. I doubt I'll get it, but as we say, we like to test our paperwork. Let's apply for it. We'll test our paperwork and see where we're at. So I applied for it, and I actually got the position. Now, I didn't think that was my career path. It was a little bit different for me going from, say, correctional services into unit management.
Sure.
So I don't think I was happy doing that job.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I wanted to get back into correctional services. So a position opened for lieutenant actually on the complex, and I applied for that, and I was selected as a lieutenant. So staff tease me, and they say that I have 2 scars in my back. One, when they removed my backbone to be a correctional counselor, and one when they put it back in when I became a lieutenant.
Yeah. There's a lot of ribbing goes on with that kind of stuff.
I call it fun banter.
Yeah. We absolutely need those jobs, but they're absolutely, I had the opportunity to become a unit manager at one point. I was like, I just don't think I can do that. That's just not who I am. Yeah. So, but one thing about the Bureau, one thing about corrections that people don't realize, people that are coming into this, is how many options. You go in a police department, there's pretty much like 2 or 3 ways that you move up. Corrections is just wide open, especially like the Bureau, 122 prisons. I don't even know how many different classifications of jobs, food service, unit management, facilities.
That's right.
It's wide open.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of opportunity out there. And if you have a skill or a background, if you have you can commit as a correctional officer and say you have a skill, a certificate, a certification in plumbing. Well, you can go into facilities and be a plumber. It's amazing. A prison is, the best way I explain it, I'm sure you've heard it, is a small town.
Mm.
A prison is a small town. What a small town deals with is exactly what a prison deals with. We just don't have automobiles driving around.
Sure.
Everything else is pretty much the same.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So what was it like being a lieutenant? I mean, I don't know about you, but the lieutenants, of course, I started off at Leavenworth. I had some lieutenants that were larger than life. And then when I made lieutenant many years later, it was just like, I became part of that club or whatever. And so what was it like becoming a lieutenant in the BOP?
Probably my second favorite job in the entire Bureau of Prisons. I was a lieutenant for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Not only at the federal prison camp for a short period of time, but at the penitentiary. I always say I operate well in chaos. I so enjoyed it because a lot of people depending on me, depending on my decisions, depending on my common sense. There's times where we make decisions that, we have to separate staff and inmates for whatever reason, for the safety of staff and inmates. You're the problem solver. You're the first responder. You set the tone for any incident that you deal with. And you deal with incidents on a daily basis. That's
especially
prison
the
life.
Complex.
Yeah. And being in that position, having that honor, that responsibility, and quite frankly, that confidence, there's nothing better. And we all know that corrections is a thankless job. Like you say, most people have no idea what we do. But we also have a shift of, staff and inmates that, we have to take care of and protect and give them our best. And as a lieutenant, that was one of.
Yeah, me too. And, it is a thankless job. But when you're a lieutenant, I think that thanklessness, that's the public, maybe the administration, but you are so close to what's going on and the people you're working with and the inmates. I mean, I had inmates thank me for the job I did when I was a lieutenant also. But you're so close to what's going on, you actually do feel like you're making a difference as a lieutenant.
That's right.
So did you start thinking moving up in leadership beyond that? Is that when that started?
I did not.
Okay.
However, someone else did for me.
Yeah, that happens.
So it was one of those things. My captain at the time, a very respected individual, he pulled me aside and said, "Chris, I want you to promote up. I want you to have more responsibility. I think you can further your career." I was like, "Well, I don't have that desire. I'm fine right here." And he says, "No, you're gonna leave." And I said, "I don't want to leave." And he said, "You're gonna leave." So he actually persuaded me, and boy, I appreciate it today.
So
I appreciate it today.
Where did that path take you?
That took me. I went to the central office, or our headquarters, in the Office of Emergency Preparedness.
Why I wore my shirt today.
What a neat job. That's what I can say. But that, emergency, I always say there's a huge difference between emergency management and emergency preparedness.
Mm-hmm.
They're both broad categories, but they're both entirely different. What I did was more emergency management, kind of the mitigation, the preparedness, the response, recovery, things of that nature. Whereas emergency preparedness is kind of those steps before, during, and after an incident. But what a neat job. That's when I became intimately involved with use of force and less lethal munitions. The Office of Emergency Preparedness took me in that direction.
You don't realize there's a lot of stuff that office is over. I didn't even realize until I actually went up there and took it over. I mean, all the teams, you're involved with them. All the use of forces across the bureau, you're putting a hand in somehow, either reviewing or people are calling you up and going, did we do this right? How do we do this? So much training comes out of that office that goes back down to those institutions. So it's a huge job up there. When I left, there was the chief, and then there were 4 specialists. Is that what it was when you were there?
Yes, we had the chief, and let's see, 1, 2, 3. I think we only had 3 at the time, 3 specialists.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, huge job, but so rewarding.
Yeah. And again, we talked about, taking advantage of your job, volunteering, getting involved. I tell people all the time that the Bureau of Prisons sent me to Indonesia, for example. Mm-hmm. And people are like, what are you talking about? Bureau of Prisons, that's federal. That's United States. What do you mean Indonesia? Well, I was part of a team that went over and did physical security assessments on their institutions that house terrorists. Again, get involved, become that subject matter expert in that field that you enjoy, and get involved, and opportunities like that will present itself.
So you were up there from what, 09 to 13?
Yeah, I stayed there for about 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was trying to figure out what do I do now? What do I do now? So I remember going to my assistant director and I said, I think I'm ready to put my show on the road and perhaps move to the next position. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay. He goes, what do you want to do? And I said, perhaps a complex captain, perhaps associate warden. And he said, Chris, you've been in custody pretty much your entire career. You need to get out of your comfort zone. I want to see you go out as an executive assistant.
Sure.
I went, okay. I didn't have that one on my radar either. Okay. So I started applying to executive assistant positions. And
for those that don't know, tell us what that is.
It's basically the executive assistant to the warden, pretty much handle all the paperwork, day-to-day planning, just kind of keep the warden in that straight path. I'm the guy that does all the administrative duties. But it also prepares me for that next level, that executive leadership level.
You learn a lot in that position. When I was a deputy, we were in between executive assistants, like a couple of months. The warden put me in there, and I became so detail-oriented. I learned so much about the bureau that I'm, like you said, custody. I didn't know a lot of this stuff. It's a big position as far as learning. That's
right.
Yeah.
And going to Butner, like you, that Butner, I know you worked at Springfield. Butner, of course, is a federal medical center. People that may not know, it's a full hospital facility, complete with hospice and a morgue and everything in between. Mental health, palliative care, dialysis, oncology, mental competency evaluations. Wow. It opened my eyes to a whole new area of the prison system, inmates that are sick, inmates that are older, things of that nature. Something I didn't think about when I was a correctional officer or an emergency management specialist. I've not dealt with that.
Yeah, it's a whole different world. I need to do an episode just on medical centers, so talk about what all that entails, because it is. I mean, as a correctional officer or a lieutenant or whatever, you come in there and you're like, okay, how do I put cuffs on a guy with one arm? It's just, it takes everything that you thought you knew about corrections and puts twists to it. And how do you treat somebody that's, hospice,
Yep. And I would always call it, correctional medicine. Because you had to find that delicate balance between, safety and security, with compassionate medical care.
And common sense sometimes. Sometimes yes. It's in the gray areas, completely out of policy, that's what right. You're dealing with. So sometimes right. It's just, being able to pull out some common sense.
That's right.
Yeah. So executive assistant, where are you headed to next?
Executive assistant. Now I'm ready to put my show on the road again. So I started applying for associate warden positions, and I was lucky to get selected at USP Lee in Virginia. USP standing for United States Penitentiary, high security. It was quite an honor to be selected at a penitentiary as a first-time associate warden.
Sure.
And because most first-time assignments are low or medium securities. And so that was a very neat experience. And of course, it was my second penitentiary at this point. So I had a little familiarity of what I was doing.
Who's your warden?
At the time, I had two wardens when I was there. One was Warden Chris Zink,
Okay.
and the other one was Warden Charles Ratledge.
So Brecken? He wasn't there yet.
He was not there yet, but
Okay.
I did work with Mike Brecken, in the Office of Emergency Preparedness in Washington, D.C. for a short period of time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Small
That's
world.
right. I met him.
Yeah. So what was Lee like?
Lee was different. It was a good experience. It was a good experience for a first-time AW.
How was it being the AW over programs instead of corrections? That's a whole new world.
It's a whole new world because, again, you're out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
What do they say? Jack of all trades, master of none type of thing. So here I'm managing departments that I have, quite frankly, very little knowledge in, to be honest with you. Let's just call it what it is. Financial management. The business officer, the money, facilities, infrastructure of the prison, food service, the food we serve to wow. I have a lot to learn. But that's why we move around. That's why we go in, different positions of higher responsibility, more oversight to learn everything. They learn the entire prison operation, every department. So perhaps we can move to that next level as warden.
It's not by accident. The Bureau has set this up over decades and improved it the way people move up through there because they didn't want somebody at the top who could only make decisions in one area of knowledge. So, yeah, they prepare you to come up there and eventually be a warden.
That's right. Yep, that's right. It takes it. Yes. Generally you do 2 tours as an associate warden, 2 tours meaning 2 different institutions, a lot of times in 2 different regions, 2 different security levels, things of that nature, to make you more rounded.
Yeah. So you went to your second AW is going to be at Big Sandy?
Second AW, they sent me to
Big Sandy at that time?
It was fairly new. Let's see, it was probably still 15, 20 years old. It's been around for a hot minute before I got there. That was a great facility. Sometimes when it comes to executive staff, when it comes to the selection of, AWs and wardens, you don't have a choice. The Bureau executive staff picks those positions. And we had an all-star team there. We really did. It was an all-star team. And we just got along so well from the warden to the AWs to the captain, which makes for a well-run institution. Mm-hmm. I thoroughly enjoyed my tenure as AW at Big Sandy because it was so well-run. I learned so much. I learned how to run a penitentiary, really. And it was the executive team, and then you can be you can be a great exec team, but you still have to have buy-in from the staff. And we had that as well. And it was just a pleasure to be an associate warden at Big Sandy during my tenure there.
So what do you attribute that to? Because that's something we have a lot of problem with right now. What do you attribute that the executive staff were doing to get that buy-in, to have that influence?
Again, I had a very high-ranking individual in the Bureau of Prisons one time tell me, sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. And there's probably some truth to that. Different disciplines, different philosophies. You're merging all these people together and you're trying to come up with, a whole. And it worked at Big Sandy for us. I think sometimes some institutions get perhaps maybe executive staff that don't see eye to eye or just have different philosophies or ideologies or whatever, and maybe they, maybe they're resisting one another, and maybe it's showing on how they manage the institution. We didn't have that. We were all on the same sheet. We were a well-oiled machine.
And that makes it comfortable for the staff. When they can look
Absolutely.
at the management and they see that the management's getting along, they're all working together, they're headed in the same direction, and it's for the good of the institution, then the staff know it's for the good of them also. So
That's right.
yeah. Wow.
That's right. There's definitely a bigger picture.
Yeah. So your next step's going to be warden, and they looked around and they picked out the prettiest institution for you to go. Kidding. Pollock was kind of rough when you went there, wasn't it?
Well, it was rough. I got to the point where I started applying for my warden. I remember getting that phone call and said, Chris, we're looking at you. We're looking at you at El Reno and Pollock. And I said, okay.
Those are opposite ends of the spectrum.
And they said, do you have a preference? I know that my preference really wasn't going to matter.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I have no preference. It's an honor to be looked at as a warden, not only selected. So I said, whatever the agency wants me to do, I'll do. So I was selected as a warden at FCI Pollock, which is in Louisiana. But interesting story, before that, I was still associate warden at Big Sandy, and Hurricane Irma did some damage down in Florida and Texas. And as a part of ESF 13, if people are familiar with that, Emergency Support Function 13, which provides, federal assistance to areas of disaster, asked if I would take a team as the team leader down to Florida for Hurricane Irma. And of course, when you're asked something like that, you say yes. And I said, of course. So I didn't get much preparation time for a warden. I went down to Florida as a team leader for Hurricane Irma. But that was a great experience, not only an honor to be selected as a team leader, it was an honor to take those men down there to give them whatever help that we could give them.
Yeah, and the ESF functions are part of a FEMA plan where they can take individuals from different agencies, bring those teams together to go out. And for ESF 13, it tends to be a lot of search and rescue and security type stuff. And I didn't get to go on any of those, but if the guys that came back in corrections, we get so little opportunity to interact with the public and help the public. And they were always just so jazzed to be able to get called out and go actually, help the public outside the prison for those.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
Excellent. So you come into Pollock. Tell me about Pollock.
Yep. So I traveled back to Big Sandy after Hurricane Irma and, prepare for my transfer to Pollock as a warden. A medium security, FCI, Federal Correctional Institution, a medium security, but it was a pretty wild place. It was a very, very active medium security.
Yes.
What do I mean by that? A lot of incidents, a lot of inmate-related incidents, whether it's drug introductions or violence, fights, things of that nature. It was just a very active facility. But what was nice about that is I took my years of emergency preparedness, my years of experience at penitentiaries, and I applied it to that facility. I'd made a lot of security enhancements, I call it. One nice thing about us when we were in the Office of Emergency Preparedness, we had the ability to read all the after actions. Awesome. I mean, we're actually reading what people did wrong. And because generally after actions, they focus on the negative, not the positive, to be honest with you. So we're kind of reading what went wrong. So put that knowledge in your head. You don't want to make the same mistake twice. So it was actually knowledge for us, great knowledge to take on to that next level. So when that situation comes up at your facility, you already have some exposure to it on how to handle it and hopefully how to handle it correctly. So that was certainly a benefit.
Yeah, that was just before COVID, but no, you stayed at the same place, didn't you?
Well, yes, I did. I stayed right at Pollock because Pollock was a complex as well.
Uh-huh.
So they had a medium security institution and a high security institution. They had a complex warden and then a warden. So they had two wardens on the complex. So I kind of call them like junior warden, senior warden. So the next step would have been an SES, or they call it Senior Executive Service, a complex warden. So I did apply for that, and I stayed right at the complex, and I assumed the duties as complex warden right at Pollock. So I did 2 years as the warden at the medium and 3 years as the warden at the penitentiary.
Right. I'm sure at the penitentiary there were daily challenges. You got there you switched jobs just before COVID. So that had to have been one of your biggest challenges.
I did. COVID was I certainly can't sit here and take all the credit, but I am the complex warden.
Mm-hmm.
And I led 2,500 inmates and 500 staff through this unprecedented, unchartered national COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
We had no inmate-related deaths.
Nice.
Again, taking all those years of emergency preparedness, all that experience I've had, all those after actions I read, and applied it toward this pandemic, and we had a successful outcome. So that's probably one of my fondest accomplishments in the entire Bureau of Prisons was managing my staff through that.
Well, and those tend to be the things we remember, except, or I guess for some of us, the crisis. When crisis happens, that's what builds bonds. That's what, builds that community inside the prison, whether it's a fight or whether it's COVID-19. So, yeah, I think all of us have that where we have this, some of our best times are what everybody else would go, that's got to be the worst time. Well, no, we were working hard. We were working together, and it was the true team at the time.
That's correct. And you have to be comfortable in your own skin, right? You have to be ready. You have to, have prison experiences that prepare you for something like that. And I was lucky enough throughout my career to have those experiences. I was very comfortable managing that pandemic with my staff.
Mm-hmm.
I remember sitting down with all my department heads and I remember looking at them all, and there's don't get me wrong, I'm a little nervous, but I remember looking at them in the face and saying, I operate in chaos. We got this, folks. We're just going to apply what we know. We're going to make good common sense decisions, and we're going to get through this as a team. And we did.
So you've moved up into that warden position. Kind of talk to me a little bit about, we get so comfortable, and I know you did too, correctional officer, lieutenant. We operate in that tactical mindset. But when you get up in warden, and especially warden over a complex, you've switched a lot to the strategic mindset. You've got to think about the whole picture. Even as a captain, it was hard. You no longer just get to think about custody. You've got to pay attention to everybody else, facilities, food service, education, make sure all of it comes together. So talk to me a little bit about that strategic thinking when you get up there in the complex warden level.
Well, the good thing is again, I transferred over from the medium. So I was already at the complex. So I knew all the staff. I knew the department heads. I knew the exec staff. It was somewhat seamless. I knew what the problems were at Pollock. So I just didn't transfer in. I was already on the complex for 2 years. So that was certainly an advantage for me. Pollock at the time had a black cloud over it. It just seems there was a lot of negative publicity surrounding Pollock, and I did not like that. One of my main goals was to get us out of the black cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Let's change up a little bit. Let's do some different decisions. Let's manage a little bit differently and try to stay out of what we call the funny papers sometimes.
Sure.
I'm a firm believer in if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not how you would do it. Focus on the areas that need fixing. And I think we did that. And I think we got it to a point where it was you didn't, knock on wood, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but we did stay out of the funny papers. We were out of that black cloud. I think we got it moving in the right direction. All right. And again, that's not a me effort. That's a team effort. I may be steering the boat, but I have my crew in the back that keeps it afloat. I did retire out of Pollock, yes.
What was was it time? Were you tired? Other
I had
opportunities?
I 30 years in, almost 30 years in, with 4 years in the military. So I had 34 years of government service. It does get to be time. It does, to recap, entry level correctional officer to an SCS warden. I did 6 geographical moves, 8 different institutions, including headquarters, worked at complexes, medical centers, penitentiaries, mediums, minimums, WITSEC, everything. And one thing that sometimes we may forget about is we're towing our family around with us. And it's hard on them as well. My son, I think at the time was in 10th grade and he was already in 10 different schools. That's good in some respects and bad in others. So it was time to, think about the family as well. Maybe look into a different endeavor and see where it takes us.
So through all those moves and all the jobs, I mean, it's no easy task going from a correctional officer to a complex warden. What do you think the secrets to success are there?
Well, I think number one, I believe the number one secret to success, key to success, is training. I refer to training, and you've heard this, I'm sure, pay now or pay later. You're either trained or you're untrained. Either invest in high quality training now or pay later for injuries and deaths and lawsuits and community distrust and all that stuff. Training does not stop. I participated in training for the past 30 years and I still learn new stuff every day. Just because you're a warden does not mean you know everything. But I also think it's important that training, and I teach this, training must be recent, relevant, realistic, and ongoing.
Absolutely. That's
very, very important. But number two, another key to success is something I did, and this is something I see in other agencies where you really got to be careful. Learn your current job before taking on more responsibility and promoting. I see a lot of staff promote up quickly. That's okay. But if you don't know what you're doing in your previous job, are you just, chasing money? Are you chasing promotions? Take your time. It's a career. It's a marathon. It's not a race. I had 24 years in before I made warden. Some people can retire at 20 years. I had 24 years in before I made warden. I was 49 years old. But more importantly, I was ready. I was ready to take on that responsibility. I was in no rush when I was a correctional officer. I was in no rush when I was a lieutenant. I was in no rush when I was an emergency management specialist or an exec or an AW. I enjoyed learning the entire aspect of the job. I wanted to be ready before I took that next step. And I think that's 2 keys to success that I hope would help out anybody.
So you've had many leadership positions, from lieutenant or even GS8, but lieutenant is usually when most people consider themselves stepping into the leadership positions, all the way up to complex warden. What are some of I don't know, if you got somebody listening here and they're moving into those positions, what are some of your leadership thoughts, tips? What helped you?
Well, first I will answer the age-old question. Are leaders born or made? But I'm going to cheat and split the difference and say both. I do believe that, some people do have, natural leadership abilities, but I also believe that those abilities and those qualities need to be honed through, experience and learning. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of catchy phrases out there. One people will say is leadership's not a rank, it's a service. You'll say, how do you inspire and guide and influence others into achieving a shared goal? First, I would say integrity. You have to be honest. You have to have a moral compass, or staff will see right through you. That's first. I believe another important aspect of leadership is is really leading from the front. Again, one of those catchy phrases, don't ask your employees to do something you wouldn't do yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I led from the front. For example, when I asked my officers, my staff members to do a shakedown, I'm in the unit doing a shakedown with them. I'm in a cell. I could tell that was a new concept to some because they were all going, the warden shaking down, things of that nature. Perhaps maybe they have not seen that. But leading from the front, I remember taking over in 2015. I think I was associate warden at the time, and a new concept in the bureau was stab-resistant vest. There was some resistance there. How do I tell a 30-year correctional officer, put on a vest? Well, wait a minute, I just went 30 years, I didn't wear a vest. How do I tell a plumber, hey, put your vest on? Well, I'm working inside a pipe chase. I have no room as it is. Put on your vest while you're interviewing an inmate, for mental health reasons. How about a hot climate? The sweat, the heat. So
Louisiana.
Lot of resistance. But you know what I did as a warden? I wore my vest. I put it on when I left my house. I took it off when I got home. I wore it all day. I set the example. I led from the front. I've actually had people say, well, the warden's doing it, I'm going to do it. That thing. Yes, it was a policy. Yes, I could have enforced it through discipline, but that wasn't the time or the place. You want them to do it because we care about you. We're going to give you equipment to protect you. And that's why you want them to do it. So leading from the front is important. I think another thing that is lacking now, and you and I saw this in our careers, is you cannot manage from your desk. You have to manage by walking around. I remember the days when the wardens would have a framed picture in their office, and it said MBWA, managed by walking around. How are you going to know what's going on in your institution unless you get off your butt, get inside there, and walk and talk with the inmates and the staff? It's that simple. You have to manage by walking around. That is leadership 101. And when I was walking around, I would ask them, what equipment, what supplies, what training do you need to successfully perform your job? What's one thing you would change right now to make your job safer? Is there anything I can do for you right now? Those type of questions. Engage with the staff. I was also known to test them a little bit too. I'd quiz them, what's the goal of OC? Involuntary closure of the eyes, things of that nature. If you lost control of your unit from an inmate fight, kind of a disturbance, what would you do? Those type of things. Call for help, secure the unit, wait for the cavalry to arrive, additional staff. Where's your cut down tool? Things of that nature. Just constantly make them think.
Constantly training. That's
constantly training. It's because training never stops.
Everybody says we don't have time for training these days. Yeah, you do. Do it right there on shift. Every time you see one of the officers, give them just a question. And I saw several guys like you. Of course, they were always the best ones. The best AWs, the best wardens were the ones that quizzed you. They wanted to, and it made them feel better. I know that this officer gets it. I know that they, understand. So they not only got that, but then we also got this leadership of they want to know that we're doing what we're supposed to.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And it is, I call it a gentle reminder. Some of that training that we do, some of those questions that we ask are just gentle reminders. It's to get your head thinking. We used to say, what if everything? What would I do if this happened? What would I do if this happened? I did that as a warden. And it seems silly, but it's a great game because I've asked myself questions that actually my heart sank in my stomach because I wasn't sure of my own answer. And that's what I mean by, what if, and then you have to, okay, I need to look into this. I'm not confident in my ability right now if that particular what if happened.
Right.
And I need to explore this a little bit further.
Yeah. Getting the officers out of there's so much stuff tied to them being in the office. I think, and I hope, and we're seeing some of it come across, is technology. And I hope technology is going to take some of that back off the officers so that and the lieutenants. Lieutenants are stuck in offices too because we're filling out reports. all these forms and all these Excel deals, But I think technology, that's what's coming into corrections. I think that's going to be the next great thing, is it's going to come in, take some of those, just piddly jobs off of us and allow us to get back to doing corrections.
Right. That's right. And if I could just close a little bit more on the leadership, a couple of other points I wanted to bring up is I think, leadership is also listening to your staff,
Mm-hmm.
Before making tough decisions, especially decisions that's going to impact, the operation or everyone. I think that's important. Everyone should have, a voice, a buy-in, opinion. And, unfortunately there's only one person that makes the decision, but everything should be taken as a whole and before a decision is made.
Ask you a question here while we're talking about this. So it's not on yet, but I interviewed a 28-year-old correctional officer the other day. So it'll be here in a few weeks. But one of the questions I asked him, I say, I get to hear from people up in the chain, that your generation is tough, to manage, that they don't look at things the same way. And he said, we don't. He said, but what we want is explain to us why. So tell me, as a leader, and you're talking about that communication, is that something we can give staff coming up? Is the why? Or do we not have time and we just say do it like we used to?
Again, I think that's that manage by walking around. That's allow those questions. That's going to allow those answers. Hey, ask me why. I'm more than willing to tell you why. Why did you paint the egress door green? Why did you do that, Warden? Why did you do that? Well, because the statistics have shown if an officer or someone within that unit was in distress, actually running for their safety, all they see is one color throughout that entire unit. They have no idea where the door is because, that fight or flight takes over and, your mind's going 100 miles an hour. Your adrenaline's just flowing throughout your body. That there's statistics where they've asked the officer, why didn't you just go out the front door, out the egress door? I couldn't see it. I didn't know where it was at. I was just running. All I saw was one color. Things of that nature. I think it's important to explain why we do what we do. As a warden, that was one of my difficulties. I had to realize that there is a generational gap between me and some of my new correctional officers coming on board. But I had a mentor, have to explain that to me, saying you do have to recognize that. They do look at things differently. It's not bad. It's just different. It's okay. So.
That's great. Any final thoughts?
Well, just to even get back, I want to mention one other thing in leadership because I think it's important.
Absolutely.
I think, I used to call it, there's sayers and there's doers out there. Some talk a great game and leaders get it done. And I think Benjamin Franklin said it best, well done is better than well said. So, action, not words. Action, not words, regarding leadership. My final thoughts would be one thing that as a warden, I always hated to hear from staff is, I can't wait till retirement. I can't wait till retirement, things of that nature. And I'd be like, it's a sad statement to hear as a warden, because I was thinking, this is your career, Make the most out of your career. Don't wish for retirement. Retirement will come. You'll get there. Trust me. Enjoy your career along the way. Get involved. Volunteer. Become an instructor. Make yourself, your staff, and your institution a better place. Something that I would press upon my staff when I'd hear about retirement. I think that's extremely important. I've had, probably lucky, but again, I've traveled outside the country, traveled all over the country with the Bureau of Prisons. So that was extraordinary to say the least. But to answer your question on a final thought, I guess I'd just like to say, thank you to all the correctional professionals out there. You're the true public servants that perform a dangerous and thankless job with with honor and compassion and professionalism. Be proud of who you are and what you do. And I would also like to say, Mike, I like to say thank you for doing what you do. I always said that the craziest things regarding human behavior happen in two places: prisons and hospitals. So for you to try to make sense of a world that doesn't make sense, it's probably extremely difficult, but you're doing a good job. So keep up the good work, brother.
Appreciate that. Yeah. It's been a learning experience for me. I'm still learning, and to get to do these interviews with you, and we're coming up on our 100th episode.
Oh.
To get to do that, I have learned so much. So corrections hasn't stopped for me just because I retired from the Bureau.
That's right.
I appreciate that.
That's right.
If someone wanted to contact you, what's the best way? Do you have a email or LinkedIn, or what would you like put in the show notes?
I am on LinkedIn. I also have an email. It's my first initial, C, my last name McConnell. So it's C McConnell 8. That may or may not be the year I was born. So C McConnell 1968 at outlook.com. Would welcome any questions or comments or any advice or any mentorship.
Absolutely. And I'll put that in the show notes. And I'll say thank you before I let you go, because you were a mentor to me in emergency preparedness and the teams. We had a lot of great conversations when I was coming, and I'm sure that's what allowed me to move up into, I finished out as chief of emergency preparedness, which I'm very proud of. So
that's right. That's right.
We had a lot of conversations, and you helped me through that process, and I appreciate it. So,
well, we helped each other.
Okay. Have a great day, Chris.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. It was an honor being on here. I appreciate you interviewing me. Thank you.
Anytime. I would like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors that make the Prison Officer Podcast possible. Omni RTLS is a company that I've been working with for the last year. I am proud to be part of this team of correctional professionals who have developed the best real-time locating system on the market today. With Omni's real-time location technology, you automatically know the accurate locations and interactions of all inmates, staff, and assets anywhere in your correctional facility, and you have this information in real time. Omni is cutting-edge software for today's jails and prisons. It is the only way to monitor every square inch of your facility while still being PREA compliant. Go to www.omnirtls for more information and to make your facility safer today. That's www.omnirtls.com. If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.